What would make this an especially useful conversation for you today?
Well, I was hoping, I guess, to get some insight on how to improve in logic games, probably.
Sure, sure. So what would you say
Mhm.
are some of your biggest struggles with logic games right now?
One of my biggest struggles is when you have to replace a rule.
Mhm.
And also, I struggle with ordering games.
Okay, so replace a rule game questions, which are also known as rule equivalency or
Mhm.
rule substitution questions. Those often seem difficult because they come up so infrequently. So when you come across
Mhm.
one, it's like, well, I haven't done one of those in a while. So you're kind of left
Mhm.
scrambling. But what if you
Right.
were to do several of those in a row? Do simply the game setup and that single question associated with it.
Hmm.
Because
Okay.
there's been one of them on virtually every single exam since
Hmm.
exam number 57.
Okay.
So I have a list of them I can email you where you just basically handpick those specifically and just work through them in order.
Okay.
Then you'll start to see the patterns related to how you can solve them. And specifically, I'd say you can solve it by seeing if any inferences that you derived initially still hold true with the new rule. You can also see if any
Mhm.
of your previous hypothetical scenarios are rendered invalid by the new rule. If they're rendered
Okay.
invalid, then they are more limiting and as
Right.
such could not possibly be equivalent. And alternatively, if they allow new scenarios that previously would not have been possible under the old state of affairs, then they are not limiting enough. So those are some
Okay.
ways you might want to play around with them.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
As
Yeah,
for
so just
ordering games, why
mhm.
do you think ordering games give you trouble?
I feel like I don't get enough information, and it's also hard for me to get a scenario. Like if there's not enough information, I can't create a scenario with which to base at least some of my work on.
Right. Yeah, some games are more open-ended than others. Some
Hmm.
games, especially some of the older ones, had a lot of
Hmm.
work you could do up front that
Hmm.
would essentially unlock the game for you entirely.
Right.
Newer games tend to be less in the way of giving you upfront work, upfront
Hmm.
inferences, and they require that you do more work over the course of the game.
Hmm.
And so part of it's just being comfortable with lack of specificity. We like things to be rigidly defined where we know exactly what the three layouts are that will unlock everything. But unfortunately, on the
Right.
LSAT in general, things can be more open ended sometimes.
True. Yes. I think that if I see an ordering game and I'm not able to create some sort of scenario, then I lose so much time in finding that I actually can't create a scenario that I don't get through any of the questions.
Yeah, I hear you. So if there is some major inference that unlocks the game, just use that, of course, and it'll carry you pretty far. Otherwise, jump into to some of the local questions. Those
Hmm.
if questions that give you a new limitation specific to that question can do a lot to just give you some momentum, get the momentum
Okay.
going, you know? If they say, like, if
Okay.
L is on slot 3, what must be true? You put L on slot 3 in combination with all the other rules, and you see what unfolds as a result.
Okay. Okay. So is it better to just dive into the questions, and then if you don't have a scenario, and then see what fits? Is it easier to go through each answer, or should I find an answer until I see one that works and move on to the next question?
Well,
Or
I
should
would
I go
generally
through
recommend, yeah, go ahead.
or should I go through A through E?
Well, if you don't have any pre-phrase or prediction for a question, I would simply scan through the choices, and I would go
Hmm.
through all five because
Hmm.
sometimes a later choice also being apparently true will tell you that you're missing something. And
Hmm.
so it only takes an extra second to double check by going through all five to make sure that only one choice actually solves what you're looking for.
Okay. Okay. Sometimes I feel like if I go through all the choices, especially if I'm trying to map it out, that I feel like I'm wasting a lot of time. Um, but if I don't, then I usually get the answer wrong because I didn't go through all the choices.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
and that reminds me of another thing that happens a lot, which is students trying to brute force the question by drawing out every scenario for all five choices.
hmm.
And that can be extremely time consuming and is not
Hmm.
the desirable way to go about it. There typically is some more efficient method you can apply, or
Mm-hmm.
your previous work can at least allow you to eliminate a couple of choices.
Right.
But during the game, you are where you are, do your best with it. But later, upon review, I would suggest you figure out or look at explanations to help you figure out what would be the optimal way to solve that game, because there typically is some more efficient route. And you may not see it all the time for every game, but if you can increase the percentage of times that you see it, the more efficient you'll be, of course.
Okay. 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 I mean, that makes sense. I think also with the logic games, I think it's especially on ordering when I get to a question where it asks, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to remember which one because I just had it. Oh, sorry. It's when it could be true. Which one could be true? I usually, for some reason, get those wrong, but I get the must be true right. So I'm not sure what I'm doing wrong, but what's the difference between those two?
Yeah, sure. It could just be that you're more prone to looking for what must be true, even if the question's asking you for something different. So it's kind of like
Right.
students will forget halfway through the question what the question was they're trying to solve, because you get so wrapped up in actually drawing scenarios or looking at previous work.
Is there a difference at all between looking for what could be true and looking for what must be true?
Yeah, there absolutely is. And think of it this way: a must be true question is really could be false except. That's another way to think about it. I'm not suggesting that it's always useful to do so, but I'm saying that
Mm-hmm.
here to illustrate the difference. For a could be true question, you only need to have seen the given choice occur once to know that it's a possibility.
Okay. And generally, the answer choices will just have one, I mean, obviously, just one correct answer, because sometimes I feel, especially if I'm rushing, I'm like, oh, maybe it could be more than one, and I'm somehow picking the wrong one of the two answers that could be there.
I mean, of course, technically speaking, there can be only one correct answer. So there is only one thing that could be true. If you're
Mm-hmm.
finding multiple apparent correct answers, then something's wrong somewhere in the
Okay.
diagram.
Mm-hmm.
For a must be true
Okay.
question, it needs to occur in every single valid scenario. So if you
Okay.
can find at least one scenario where it did not occur, then it's not a must.
Mm-hmm.
So it only takes like
Okay.
one
Okay.
in, let's say, so it only takes like 1 in 100 scenarios to prove that something could be true. If you've seen it at least once, even out of 100 or out of 1,000, you know it could occur. And on the flip side, if you've seen something not occur or fail to occur at least once out of 1,000 different scenarios, then you know that it is not a must and you can eliminate it as a result.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So for either question type, you only need one particular scenario to arrive at your correct answer. Just the question of the
Okay.
nature of that scenario.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. I'm also finding that I'm running out of time on my logic games. So is it better to try to get through all four, or to try to make sure I get, I guess, accurately one or two sections?
Well, what's your goal score?
165.
Mm-hmm. In that case, I would suggest that you attempt every question on the exam.
Okay.
If you leave out an entire game and just guess randomly on it, you're automatically sacrificing several questions.
Right.
And especially games being the most perfectible section, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So, meaning that it would be difficult to avoid losing points on logical reasoning and reading comprehension. But let's say if you lost 3 on each of those sections or 4 on each of those sections, that's already putting you at below 170. If you got 4 wrong on each, that's already putting you below 170. Then if you lose, let's say 4 to 5 points on games from eliminating a game or not attempting it, then you, assuming you didn't get perfect on the other 3 games, that's putting you below 165.
Okay. Okay.
When are
So
you
just
taking the
work
LSAT, Hattie?
I am registered for November, but I'm also registered for January.
Mm-hmm.
And I was actually just thinking today, maybe I should withdraw from November, but I think I'll just take it and see how I do. Because the way I'm testing now, it's pretty decent, but of course I'd love to get it higher.
Yeah. Well, you may end up with a decent score on November, but if you want to secure that 165 plus, then
Right.
you might want to go for January with a focus on improving on games significantly, doing
Mm-hmm.
all the released games ever, or at least all the released games from this millennium, since 2000. Focus on those, master them if you can. It's just a question of putting in the time, drilling those games, and looking at explanations or redoing the games multiple times. You can get close to perfection or perfection on games much more easily than on the other sections. And then if you were only losing a few points on each of the others, that could solidly put you in the high 160s and beyond.
Okay. What about the older question types that haven't showed up but are now showing up again? I feel like I'm at a point where I can understand how to work my way through most of them. But then I found that as I was trying to learn the new question types that I've not studied before, the normal question types are the ones that I started getting wrong again. So is there some sort of different way of thinking for those older, like the circular questions, or they just seem completely different from everything else?
Yeah, the older or curveball or weird types of logic games, they have the same underlying logic. They just appear different on the surface. And they also tend to involve a little bit less upfront work, perhaps, and more work over the course of the game.
Mm-hmm.
They're definitely worth looking at because, of course, they have been showing up more frequently. And like anything else, you just have to practice them. I have a list of those too, if you want, and you could work on those and drill those. But I would make sure that you've mastered the more common fundamental game types first. Like make sure I would spend a lot of time on ordering if ordering is giving you trouble, because ordering is almost certainly going to show up, whereas any given specific type of curveball game like circular is much less likely to show up. If you want perfection on games, though, I'd say learn everything. But the order in which I would do it is definitely focus on ordering to start, because that's an incredibly common game type. I would also work on rule substitution questions, because those show up typically at least once per exam, and have been doing so consistently for the past 30 plus exams. And then once you're good on those, or alongside them, work on the curveball games, just to expose yourself to the variety of tricks LSAT can throw at you. And it's not really about mastering the specifics of each curveball game, although you should. It's really more about adopting a more flexible approach, where you recognize that even if a game doesn't have 7 horizontal slots or a T chart for in-out, there is a way to solve it, and it involves perhaps holding that abstract rule in your head or pattern in your head and being able to apply it consistently. But they are ultimately testing the same things. And then techniques like, of course, reusing previous work can still apply too.
All right. What about, I guess, the combo games, where it's both ordering and placing? Those seem to give me a run for my money. Like when I see those, I know I'm in trouble. So I'm not sure. I'm usually good with just the most simplest type of game, and then once they add in a different element and it's a combination, I think I get caught up in, I think, again, trying to figure out what a scenario might be, and then if I can't, then I lose half of my time. I mean, is there a way, I guess not only in just that particular type of game, but is there a way to quickly move past the initial and then try to get into it?
Yeah, there is. I think I would suggest that you start with looking at how LSAT lays out the game in the orientation question. The first question of the game, is typically orientation, and they're giving you a hint as to how they think about it and how they lay it out. And you don't have to mirror what they do perfectly, but it can guide you a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And typically, if you're dealing with, let's say, a combination of ordering and grouping in and out, well, in out is just basically you're choosing who's in to then place an order. So I'd say eliminate the ordering, eliminate the in out component first by figuring out who's going to be in. And then you lay out your slots for who's going to be in. Or you can have your in slots and then a couple of slots reserved for those who are out.
Okay.
But basically, I say you deal with one aspect of the game at a time.
Okay. I came upon a recent a practice test I took yesterday where I think it was in and out, but it only gave not two, but maybe 3 rules. And I sat there and looked at the rules and I couldn't figure out where I'm supposed to go from this small section of information. But I was able to eventually work it out by trying to go through the answers, but it seems like it's just so tricky. It's just so
they
tricky.
are. Especially the ones with only a few rules, and that requires really just slowing down and taking the time to thoroughly understand them. And if something isn't clicking, take the time to make sure it does eventually click for you, because there's no hope to solving the game without knowing what the rules are.
Is there a point where you'll run out of logic games to practice? Like, if I go through every single one, what do I do then?
Well, I'd say first off, cross that bridge when you get to it, because there's nearly 100 released exams times 4 games per exam, 400 games. So I'd say start with those.
Okay.
And you could spend now through January just focusing on half of those.
Right.
So if you want to, but you can cover all of them if you devote yourself to it. And if you've covered all of them, then I'd say do them again and do them again.
Okay.
And if you understand all of those perfectly, or even the most recent half, the most recent 200 or so, you'd be well situated to handle anything that LSAT would throw at you.
Okay. They're not coming out with any new question types, are they?
There's fundamentally, there's nothing radically new under the sun with the LSAT.
Okay.
They're always dressing up and reusing old stuff, and even some of the weird new stuff, like you said, like circular games. They've shown up a couple of times in the past. I think prep test number 1 and prep test number 41 both included circle games.
Okay.
So and I know that there was a circle game this fall, and so if you hadn't done exams 1 or 41, you might not be prepared for that. Right. But someone who's even done exam number 41 would have a trick ready to go to handle that, even though it only shows up once in a blue moon.
Okay. All right.
Well, we're just about up for today, Addie, but what would you say is the biggest insight you got from our call today?
That I need to do more practice of the practice games and focus, I guess, on more accuracy for the entire section. Because I was really just trying to get at least 2 correct all the way through 100% accuracy, and I need to do better. I need to work more on making that all the sections 100% accurate. So I think I can do it. And it's learnable, so just gotta learn it.
It is, and it sounds like you're committed to putting in the time to making it happen.
Definitely.
Fantastic. Well, it's been great connecting with you, Addie. Please keep in touch and let me know if you need anything at all as you move forward.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.